Ladies and gentlemen, every morning is a negotiation between who you were yesterday and who you're daring to become today. Before the world has a chance to label you, limit you, or remind you of what didn't work, there is a sacred moment where your voice is the loudest voice in the room. And what you say to yourself in that moment doesn't just set the tone for your day, it shapes the direction of your life. Some of us wake up already exhausted, already apologizing for taking up space, already replaying old failures like they're morning news headlines. But hear me clearly, you cannot build a powerful life with a defeated inner dialogue. You cannot rise with confidence while whispering doubt to your own soul. The way you talk to yourself in the morning is either preparing you for victory or training you for survival. Your voice is the first authority you submit to every morning. And before anyone else gets access to your confidence, your courage, or your clarity, your own words have already cast a vote. Long before emails arrive, notifications buzz, or responsibilities start calling your name, there is a quiet conversation happening within you. That conversation is not small, and it is not harmless. It is shaping how you see yourself, what you expect from the day, and how much permission you give yourself to show up fully. Every morning, your inner voice decides whether you rise as a participant in your own life or a bystander waiting for instructions. Many people don't realize that they are already agreeing with something before they even open their eyes. They wake up tired and immediately tell themselves, this is going to be too much, or I don't have what it takes today, or I'm already behind. Without intending to, they surrender their authority to fear, doubt, and past disappointment. And once that authority is handed over, everything else follows. Your posture changes, your energy shifts, your expectations lower, not because the day is impossible, but because your voice set the ceiling before the day even began. The voice you listen to first becomes the lens through which you interpret everything else. If your own words are harsh, every challenge feels heavier. If your own words are hopeless, every opportunity feels unreachable. But when your voice is grounded in truth, it creates stability before chaos has a chance to interrupt. That doesn't mean you deny your struggles. It means you decide that struggle will not be the loudest thing you hear. It means you choose to speak strength, even when you feel weak, direction, even when the path is unclear, worth, even when insecurity tries to rise up early. Your inner voice is not just commentary, it is instruction. It tells your mind what to focus on and your heart what to believe. When you start the day criticizing yourself, your mind goes to work proving you right. When you start the day affirming your capacity, your mind looks for ways to support that truth. This is why mornings are so powerful. Your mind is most impressionable before it is overwhelmed. Whatever you plant in it first has the best chance to take root. Some of the limits you feel are not coming from the outside world. They are coming from agreements you made internally years ago and keep renewing every morning without questioning them. Agreements like I'm not disciplined, I always mess things up, or this is just how I am. These statements feel familiar, so they feel true, but familiarity is not the same as accuracy. Every morning gives you the opportunity to renegotiate those agreements. You can decide that old labels no longer get to lead your day. Taking authority over your voice is an act of self-respect. It is saying, I will not speak to myself in ways I would never allow from anyone else. It is recognizing that encouragement is not arrogance and belief is not denial. You are allowed to affirm yourself before you have evidence. You are allowed to speak possibility before you see results. Growth often begins with language that feels uncomfortable because it contradicts the version of you that has been stuck. When you change the way you speak to yourself in the morning, you change how you respond to pressure. Instead of collapsing under expectation, you stand with intention. Instead of shrinking when challenged, you remember who you are becoming. This doesn't make the day easier, but it makes you steadier. And steadiness is what allows you to keep moving forward, even when everything isn't resolved yet. Authority doesn't always sound loud. Sometimes it sounds calm, grounded, and intentional. It sounds like reminding yourself that you are learning, that you are capable of growth, that today does not have to repeat yesterday. It sounds like choosing words that align with where you're going instead of where you've been. Each morning, your voice is casting a vision for your day, shaping your emotional posture, and deciding how much power you hand over to circumstances you cannot control. What you say to yourself before the world speaks matters more than most people are willing to admit, because once the noise of the day begins, it becomes harder to separate truth from reaction. The world is loud, demanding, and impatient, and it rarely asks whether you are ready before it starts telling you who you should be, how fast you should move, and what success is supposed to look like. If you don't establish your own narrative early, you will spend the rest of the day responding instead of leading, absorbing opinions instead of standing on purpose. Every morning, there is a brief window where your mind is open and unguarded. It is in that space that your words carry extra weight. Before comparison creeps in, before social media highlights convince you that everyone else is ahead, before expectations pile up, you have the chance to remind yourself of what is real. Not what is trending, not what is urgent, but what is true. This is where alignment begins. Not in productivity, not in achievement, but in clarity. When the world speaks first, it often speaks in pressure. It measures your value by output, your worth by results, and your identity by performance. If that becomes the standard you accept, you will constantly feel like you are chasing approval that keeps moving further away. But when you speak to yourself first, you get to define success on your own terms. You get to decide that progress counts, that effort matters, and that growth is not always loud or visible. Many people start their day already bracing themselves for disappointment. They anticipate conflict, failure, or exhaustion before any of it actually happens. This anticipation is not wisdom, it is fear rehearsing. And rehearsed fear becomes expectation. When you speak to yourself with anxiety in the morning, you train your nervous system to stay on edge all day. But when you speak reassurance, you give your body and mind permission to move with steadiness instead of survival. Your words in the morning are not about hyping yourself up for perfection. They are about grounding yourself in reality. Reality says you will face challenges, but it also says you are not facing them empty-handed. Reality says you may not control everything, but you can control how you show up. Speaking this truth before the world speaks helps you respond from intention rather than impulse. If you don't speak life into your own identity, the world will label you by its convenience. It will reduce you to a role, a mistake, a statistic, or a season. And over time, you may start living as if those labels are permanent. Morning self-talk is where you resist that reduction. It is where you remind yourself that you are layered, evolving, and allowed to outgrow what once defined you. The way you speak to yourself early in the day also determines how much access negativity gets later. When criticism comes, it lands differently if you've already affirmed your worth. When setbacks happen, they don't shake you as deeply if you've already anchored your identity. You are not as easily derailed when your foundation has been reinforced before the storm. Speaking before the world does is an act of leadership. It means you are not waiting for validation to move with confidence. It means you are not allowing circumstances to decide your emotional temperature. You are choosing to lead your own mind, to set the tone, and to decide the lens through which you will interpret everything that follows. That choice, repeated every morning, quietly shapes the way you live, the way you love, and the way you pursue what matters most. Self-talk can either heal you or quietly sabotage you, and the most dangerous part of sabotage is that it often sounds familiar. It doesn't arrive as an attack from the outside. It comes in your own voice, using your own language, repeating phrases you've heard so many times that you stop questioning them. Over time, these words don't just pass through your mind, they settle into your identity, shaping how you see yourself and what you believe is possible for your life. Many people think healing begins with external change, with new habits, new environments, or new opportunities. But healing often starts much closer in the way you speak to yourself when no one else is listening. If your inner dialogue is harsh, impatient, or dismissive, it can reopen wounds faster than circumstances ever could. You may be doing all the right things outwardly, yet still feel stuck because your internal language keeps pulling you back into old pain. Sabotaging self-talk rarely announces itself as cruelty. It disguises itself as realism, as being honest, or just knowing yourself. It says things like, I'm just not wired that way, or this is as good as it gets for me. These statements feel safe because they lower expectation, but what they really do is lock potential behind fear. Over time, you begin to make decisions that protect you from disappointment rather than move you toward growth. Healing self-talk, on the other hand, does not ignore your history. It acknowledges where you've been without letting it dictate where you're going. It allows you to name your struggles without naming yourself by them. This kind of language creates space for compassion. And compassion is not weakness. It is the foundation for sustainable change. You cannot shame yourself into becoming better, but you can speak yourself into becoming braver. The words you repeat internally shape your emotional reflexes. If your self-talk is rooted in blame, your reflex becomes defensiveness. If it is rooted in doubt, your reflex becomes hesitation. But when your self-talk is rooted in understanding and truth, your reflex becomes resilience. You recover faster from mistakes. You don't spiral as deeply when things go wrong. You give yourself room to learn instead of demanding perfection. Quiet sabotage often shows up in moments of transition. When an opportunity arises, a small voice may remind you of every time you failed. When progress starts to show, another voice may warn you not to get your hopes up. These moments reveal how powerful self-talk really is. It can either remind you of your growth or rehearse your fears. The difference is not talent or discipline, but awareness. Becoming aware of your self-talk is an act of courage. It requires you to listen without immediately agreeing. It asks you to question whether the things you tell yourself are true, helpful, or simply habitual. Not every thought deserves your belief. Some thoughts are echoes of old pain, outdated protection mechanisms that no longer serve the person you are becoming. Healing begins where you interrupt the cycle. When you replace, I always mess this up, with I'm learning how to do this better. When you shift from I'm not enough to I'm growing into who I need to be. These shifts may seem small, but language shapes perception and perception shapes behavior. Over time, the way you speak to yourself becomes the environment your mind lives in. A supportive inner environment allows you to take risks without collapsing under fear. It allows you to face hard truths without losing hope. It gives you permission to evolve instead of staying stuck in survival mode. Self-talk doesn't just comment on your life. It participates in it, influencing the choices you make, the boundaries you set, and the grace you allow yourself as you move forward. Mornings are where confidence is built or broken, not because everything is decided in a few early hours, but because the foundation is laid before the day begins to apply pressure. How you rise, how you think, and how you speak to yourself in those first moments quietly influences how you handle everything that follows. Confidence is not something you suddenly find in the middle of a challenge. It is something you prepare before the challenge ever shows up. When you wake up rushed, distracted, or already criticizing yourself, your mind interprets the day as something to survive rather than something to step into with intention. That survival mindset makes even small obstacles feel overwhelming. It causes you to doubt your ability to handle what's ahead, not because you lack capability, but because you never gave yourself a moment to remember who you are. Mornings are your chance to reintroduce yourself to yourself before responsibilities start demanding attention. Many people wait for confidence to arrive after they've proven themselves, but real confidence is built in private long before it's displayed in public. It grows when you choose to center yourself instead of immediately reaching for distraction. It strengthens when you take a moment to breathe, reflect, and set an internal tone that is not dependent on external validation. This is where belief is practiced, not performed. Confidence can be broken just as easily in the morning if the first. thing you do is compare your life to someone else's highlight reel. Comparison steals clarity, and without clarity, confidence has nothing to stand on. When you measure yourself against standards that don't reflect your journey, you create unnecessary insecurity. The morning is not the time to review everything you're not. It is the time to align with who you are becoming. The way you speak to yourself in the morning either reinforces trust or erodes it. Trust in yourself is built when your words are consistent with your values. If you tell yourself you are capable, but then treat yourself like a liability, your confidence weakens. But when your words and actions align, even in small ways, your belief in yourself becomes more stable. Consistency, not intensity, is what strengthens confidence over time. Mornings also determine how you respond to mistakes later in the day. If you begin the day grounded, a mistake becomes feedback. If you begin the day insecure, a mistake becomes confirmation of every doubt you already had. This is why mornings matter so much. They shape your interpretation, not your circumstances. Two people can face the same challenge and respond completely differently based on the mindset they carried into the day. Confidence is not the absence of fear. It is the decision not to let fear be the decision maker. That decision is often made early, sometimes before you even realize it. When you wake up and immediately surrender your focus to stress, you give fear a head start. But when you take even a few moments to anchor yourself in truth, you slow fear down and give clarity room to lead. The most powerful mornings are not always productive or impressive. Sometimes they are quiet, intentional, and unseen. They are the mornings where you choose self-respect over self-criticism, presence over panic, and alignment over urgency. These choices may feel small, but they compound. Day after day, they reinforce a sense of stability that doesn't collapse under pressure. When confidence is built in the morning, it shows up throughout the day in subtle ways. You speak more clearly. You hesitate less. You recover faster when things don't go as planned. Not because the day went perfectly, but because you started from a place of inner agreement rather than internal conflict. And that agreement becomes the strength you carry with you into every moment that follows. You must interrupt fear before it sets the tone, because fear is not patient and it does not wait for permission. It shows up early, often before logic, before faith, before clarity has a chance to speak. Fear's strategy is simple. Get in first and sound convincing. If it can shape the mood of your morning, it can influence the decisions of your entire day. That is why fear doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, knowing that a quiet suggestion repeated often enough can feel like truth. Fear likes to present itself as protection. It tells you to be cautious, to lower expectations, to avoid disappointment. But over time, that protection becomes confinement. What began as self-defense turns into self-doubt, and before you realize it, fear has framed your entire perspective. You stop asking what's possible and start asking what's safe. Interrupting fear means recognizing that not every warning deserves obedience. The problem with letting fear set the tone is that it narrows your vision. When fear leads, you focus more on what could go wrong than what could grow. You interpret neutral situations as threats and challenges, as confirmations of inadequacy. This doesn't happen because you are weak. It happens because fear is persistent. It rehearses worst-case scenarios until your nervous system treats them as inevitable. Interrupting fear requires intentional awareness. You have to notice the moment fear begins to narrate your thoughts. The moment it says, "You're not ready," or "This is too risky," or "You failed before." That moment is your opportunity, not to argue aggressively, but to pause and question. Is this fear speaking from wisdom or from past pain? Is it responding to the present or replaying the past? Fear often borrows evidence from old experiences. It reminds you of previous disappointments and convinces you that history will repeat itself. But growth means recognizing that you are not the same person you were when those experiences happened. You have learned. You have adapted. You have survived things you once thought would break you. Interrupting fear means refusing to let outdated information guide present decisions. If fear is not interrupted early, it begins to dictate behavior. It influences how you communicate, how you show up, and how much of yourself you allow to be seen. You start playing smaller than necessary, not because you lack ability, but because fear has convinced you that visibility is dangerous. Over time, this shrinking becomes a habit, and habits shape identity. Interrupting fear is not about eliminating it. Fear may still exist, but it doesn't get the final say. You can acknowledge fear without surrendering to it. You can feel uncertainty and still choose action. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to move forward while fear is present. That willingness is built in moments where you choose intention over instinct. One of the most effective ways to interrupt fear is through language. What you say to yourself matters. When fear says, I can't handle this, you respond with, I've handled hard things before. When fear says, this will end badly, you respond with, I don't know the outcome, but I trust my ability to respond. These responses don't guarantee comfort, but they restore agency. Fear loses power when it is exposed. When you name it, examine it, and place it in context, it can no longer operate unchecked. Silence allows fear to grow. Awareness keeps it contained. The earlier you interrupt fear, the less influence it has over your emotional state and decision making. Setting the tone requires leadership, and leadership begins internally. It is the decision to guide your thoughts instead of being dragged by them. When you interrupt fear early, you create space for clarity, creativity, and courage to enter the conversation. That space changes how you move, how you speak, and how you engage with the opportunities in front of you. Fear may still knock, but it no longer gets to decide how the day begins. Speaking truth daily trains your mind for purpose because the words you repeat are the blueprints for your actions. Every thought that passes through your mind carries the potential to shape your choices, your energy, and your trajectory. When you intentionally speak truth to yourself each morning, you are laying a foundation for a day guided not by confusion, doubt, or external chaos, but by clarity, intention, and aligned action. This is not about wishful thinking. It is about acknowledging reality while committing to the version of yourself you are capable of becoming. Truth spoken consistently becomes an internal compass. It reminds you of who you are, what you value, and where you are going. Without that compass, your mind becomes vulnerable to distraction, fear, and the influence of external pressures. You may drift through opportunities without realizing whether they serve your purpose or derail it. Purpose is not a result of luck. It is the product of consistent alignment between thought, word, and action. Daily truth-telling is how alignment begins. Many people underestimate the influence of language on the mind. They believe actions alone define their outcomes, but actions without the reinforcement of truth in thought are inconsistent at best. When you speak truth, you prepare yourself to act with clarity. You remind yourself that mistakes are part of growth, setbacks are temporary, and potential is always within reach. These statements anchor your focus and prevent the mind from wandering into fear or self-doubt. Purpose requires persistence, and persistence is strengthened by repetition. Each day you choose to speak truth, you are reinforcing a mental pattern that favors resilience over resignation. If your inner dialogue is filled with exaggeration, complaint, or self-criticism, you are training your mind to resist effort. But if your dialogue is rooted in honesty and encouragement, you cultivate a mindset that persists even when circumstances are difficult. Truth also creates accountability. When you commit to recognizing reality each morning, you no longer allow excuses to dictate your choices. You acknowledge your limitations without letting them define you. You see your strengths without inflating them into arrogance. You approach challenges with a balanced perspective, guided by what is true rather than what is convenient. Speaking truth daily is an act of self-respect because it refuses to accept delusion over growth. The practice of daily truth-telling is not always comfortable. It often requires you to confront areas where you are avoiding responsibility, where fear has lingered, or where complacency has settled in. But discomfort in this context is productive. It is the stretching of the mind and spirit that signals progress. Growth rarely occurs in comfort. It occurs in the conscious acknowledgement of reality paired with intentional response. Consistency in speaking truth also builds emotional resilience. When your thoughts are aligned with reality, you are less likely to be tossed by external circumstances. You recognize challenges as temporary and solvable, not as evidence of inadequacy or defeat. You can face criticism, uncertainty, or failure with steadiness because your inner narrative has already prepared you to navigate difficulty. The mind trained in truth operates from discernment, not panic. Daily truth-telling reinforces vision. It allows you to see where you are headed even when the path is unclear. When mornings begin with honesty, your decisions throughout the day are guided by purpose rather than impulse. You are less likely to be swayed by fleeting trends, peer pressure, or societal expectation because your foundation is built on clarity and understanding. Truth spoken consistently creates the framework for intentional living. Speaking truth is an act of leadership over your own life. It asserts that you will not be a passive participant, reacting to circumstance or surrendering to fear. It reminds you that your mind is a powerful tool and how you train it matters. Purpose emerges when your thoughts, words, and actions are aligned. And daily truth is the training ground where that alignment begins. The habit of speaking truth daily transforms small decisions into a coherent life strategy. You no longer react randomly or inconsistently, but you operate from a place of clarity and intentionality. Every day you reinforce this habit, your mind becomes more disciplined, your focus sharper, and your ability to pursue long-term goals stronger. Words are not just sounds, they are seeds that grow into the reality you choose to live in.